Hey, this is Ralph, and in this video I want to welcome you to our Module 7 topic, which is solving problems with spreadsheets, with Excel workbooks. Now I have our module open, and there is a PowerPoint that I want you to check out. In fact, I guess I'll go ahead and open it here, open link in new window. Actually, I meant to open link in new tab, but good enough. And we've got that. In fact, let me go ahead and take this tab and add it to this browser. There we go. And you're going to find a PowerPoint in here. Now this PowerPoint is not very long. Looks like we just got about 29 slides, and a couple of these slides are hidden, meaning I was going to put some content on there, but they weren't really too important to what I wanted to show you. So we have a few hidden slides. But basically there are some screen captures walking you through a process, so to speak, of creating a more useful budget for a college student, but I'm going to work on that with you. So we have the PowerPoint, and that's there mostly if you wanted to work on your own completely, just to have some visual aids to go along the way. Let's see, so we've got that going on. Now our participation is going to be a combination of two things. It says here participation is amortization table. I'm changing that up to the budget, to the college student budget. So that'll be a little bit different by the time you see this. And then there's also a portion that you'll do as a SAM project. I definitely want you to keep up with these SAM projects because they will have a more direct tie-in to the assignments that you're working on and ultimately the final exam. So we're going to do that as well. Probably in a separate video though, of course. So that is our plan of action. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and I actually have the budget here with the kind of various things we're going to do. And yours doesn't have to look like mine. I'll try to remind you of that in a number of places as we go along. It's really the skills that I want you to be able to demonstrate. So if we get the key parts down here, that's going to give me confidence that you've at least had a little bit of hands-on practice with some of these Excel skills. Granted, it may look a little bit different. That's cool. And then you'll go ahead and turn this in. You'll turn this part in via Canvas, where obviously the Cengage portion, you don't turn that in via Canvas. I'll just go check that at a separate time. However, I'm going to take this budget and I'm going to move it off to the side. And I actually, before I do that, I'm going to click File, get a blank workbook. And there we go. So now we got ourselves a blank workbook. And this part I definitely want you to do as well. So get yourself a blank workbook. I'm going to zoom in to make mine nice and big, easy to see. And I'm going to go ahead and File, Save As. I want you to save this to a place where you can easily find this, because remember, you're going to turn this in as half of your participation module 7. I'm going to go ahead and browse, and let's see. I'm going to save this. I've got a portable drive plugged in at the moment. I've got a documents folder on there. My original one is budget for college students, so I'm going to call this one CIS120 module 7 participation dash budget. There we go. That's pretty descriptive. So later on, when you go to turn this in, you should have no problem finding it for sure. Okay. Now, we are going to be very organized with this, and like I said, we've got a PowerPoint somewhere. I've got my PowerPoint right here. And one of the first things we're going to do is try to keep our sheets organized. Now, we're not going to go ahead and label all the sheets we'll be using. We'll do those as we get to them. But we definitely are going to be working on our college budget. That's going to be our primary activity. So if I head over to my Excel file and double click down on my sheet tab, you're not going to be able to see that because of my camera there. So let me just move this up here. Make this a little bit easier to see. There we go. Now you can see it. So if I double click on this sheet 1 sheet tab, I can rename that. And I'll go ahead and call mine college budget. And since we're, might as well call this 25-26, right? Because that's the term we're getting into, 25-26. It's certainly reasonable that a college student would probably not think of their budget in a calendar year format, but probably in an academic year format. So this could be from September of 25 to August of 26, something like that. A lot of businesses will do non-calendar years, and they'll call those their fiscal year because their fiscal year may be different than a calendar year. COCC's fiscal year is different than a calendar year. I think theirs is July 1st to June 30th or something along those lines. Okay, so this is the start of our budget. I'll go ahead and maximize this again. Now, we're going to give it some data. And when we put data into Excel, we want it to be as clean and unformatted as possible. So that way we have a nice, clear table of data. Now, so that this makes sense to you, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. And I'm going to copy. No, what am I going to copy? I'm going to copy this part from my other sheet. I'm just going to do a copy. I'm going to head over here and I'm going to paste. I don't want the formatting. Paste values. Yeah, perfect. Just like that. Now I pasted mine into cell A2, but I could have done A1. Ultimately, we are going to be moving these down. But for now, this is pretty good. So what I want you to do at this stage of the game, there we go. And I'm going to go ahead and minimize a bunch of other stuff so it doesn't distract us too much here. Let's get this sized out a little bit. Perfect. There we go. So go ahead and pause your video, and I'd like you to create some data on there. Don't worry, I know, it seems like we gotta type a lot of stuff. That's okay. I typed it myself the first time around. You can type it too. And basically we have our category, and the category is either going to be income or expense. Now, even if you don't have a true income category, even if you don't have 3 income categories, I want you to do what I do here. The goal for this budget is not that it's going to be super realistic for you. The goal is to make this a realistic but generic college student budget. And then later on your own, after the term is over perhaps, you might go in and delete things and add things and replace numbers to things that are more real to you. You are going to be turning this into me, and you don't want to share your personal financial data with me, but what I do want to see from you is that you can use Excel in this, mature and professional way to solve a problem. And of course, personal finance, managing money is a very common problem that we all face, and Excel is well suited to us using, to analyzing that data and solving those problems. So even though this may not be real to you, go ahead and put it in here. So I've got 3 income sources, 3 income categories, the expense category field, just so you can see what that is, just the word expense category. And so for income, since that's not an expense, I just have NA, which stands for non-applicable. And then there's a description. We have our primary job, we have any grants that we might get, and we have any freelance or gig work that we might have. And then you'll have a budgeted amount, and you're going to have an actual amount. Go ahead and key that information in. Notice I don't have any dollar signs or commas. That's okay. It's just plain old numbers. That's perfectly good. And then I've got a handful of expenses. Again, maybe these are not all real life expenses, but these are the ones that I've got here. So all of my expenses have the expense category, and then I split them up into different the expense category for the generic category, and then under expense category, they're either a need, a want, or a savings. Needs, wants, saving. And so we've got a few things in there, and I've got a little description so we can kind of be clear on what it is. And then I've put in some budget amounts and some actual amounts. So pause and get that all filled out on your worksheet. Now that you've got that, go ahead and take a second to hit your save button. Every time you do something significant, you want to go ahead and hit that save button. Now, of course, there is an autosave, and autosave does work pretty well, but I've been burned by autosave in the past. I can't say I've been burned by autosave in the recent past, but I still have that trauma of losing data before. So I always like to save and make sure everything has got what I have. Now, I'm not using OneDrive right now. I'm saving to my local external drive. So I'm always a little bit paranoid that I might lose something. So yeah, definitely good to hit that save button. And if you don't see me hit the save button, I could just be pressing Control S on my keyboard like I just did. And that's a quick save right there. Okay, so our college budget is looking pretty good. We've got the details in there. And of course, in real life, we could add more things. We can delete rows. We can put in more realistic numbers. The budgeted amount, and then this is assuming for a month. And then after that month is over, what did we actually spend or earn on that particular thing? The real numbers. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. And I'm kind of glancing over at the finished one here. And I see one of the first calculations we can do is figure out the difference. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to create a column off to the side here, and for me it's F2 just because I created an empty first row. I didn't do that intentionally. It just happens to be where I pasted all of my data in there. And if I didn't like that, I can right click on that number 1 and I can choose delete. Now remember, you've already done some Excel stuff. This is our second week of Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to assume that you're pretty comfortable clicking on things, inserting and deleting rows, changing some formats and stuff like that. So I'm going to go pretty quick on some of those. But let's go ahead and put in the difference. Okay, so for our difference, what are we going to do here? Let's see, how about equals, let's take the actual minus the budgeted amount. Simple subtraction formula, right? That's pretty easy. Okay, so for my primary job, I actually got 2,340, but I budgeted only 2,300. Therefore, I got $40 extra. All right, $40 positive. That sounds pretty good. Now I'm going to take this formula and just double click the fill handle, and that's going to autofill it all the way down. So double clicking that fill handle will look at the column next to you, and it'll autofill down to that limit. That's pretty useful. And so now we have that subtraction formula. And let's look at my my freelance work. I actually got $310. Maybe it's Uber Eats or something like that. I actually got 310 bucks, but I budgeted 400. So that's a $90 shortfall. I got $90 less. So it's good that that's a negative. However, this is kind of weird here. Let's go to this one. This groceries. I actually spent $436 even though I budgeted $400. Well, this is showing as a positive 36. And really it should be a negative because I spent more than I budgeted. So this is our first anomaly that we need to deal with. Well, when it comes to calculating the difference, the actual minus the budget is good for an income category. However, for an expense category, we should be doing the budget minus the actual to get that number. So I want to change the structure of this subtraction formula based on the category involved. And to do that, an if function will be very, very convenient. Now, to organize this table a little bit better going forward, we're going to convert this into a table. Very easy to do. I kind of glance over my table of data and I see that I don't have any completely empty rows, and I see that I don't have any completely empty columns. So I can click anywhere on here and press Control T on my Windows machine. And it's going to know to select this contiguous collection of data as my table. Does my table have headers? It does. I've got this category, expense category, description, budget, actual difference. Those are my headers. I'll click OK. And it even gives it some default formatting. And I can go to it goes into table design because it's now a table. I could change this style. I don't know what I want. Let's see, it's warm today. Let's go for what's a good warm color? Some shade of green? I'll do this one. Looks good. Okay. Now, in addition to giving it some visual appeal, converting this data to a table actually gives us several really useful functional benefits. For now, just so you can see, I've got these little arrows on my fields, and this will allow us to actually click on these, and we can easily sort by this particular column, A to Z, or we can filter out. Maybe I just want to look at all of my dining out expenses. Of course, I only have one, so that's kind of boring, but we could do something like that. I'll cancel, but I could go to income, or I'm sorry, category, click on this, and I could deselect and only show expenses and click OK. And now I'm just going to see my expenses. This is a filter, and I can go back. Oh, maybe I just want to look at income. I'll just choose income now. And now I just have my income sources filtering. I'll go back, and now I'm going to click select all, and I'll see them all again in that default order. Great. So now back to what we were doing. We have to change our difference function based on the category. Is it income or is it expense? So my formula right here, E2 minus D2, actual minus budget, is accurate for income, but I want it to be the opposite for expense. So here's how we're going to write it. I'll just go ahead and, actually I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of these. Didn't need to do that, but I want to write the first one. And our goal is always going to be to write a formula or function correctly one time so that we can just autofill it all the way down. We should never catch ourselves repeatedly typing the same or very similar formula. Okay, equals if. You know what? I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. I want this to be nice and big. There we go. All right, starting right here. Equals if, parentheses, if my category, this is the other benefit of using a table. Notice when I click on A2, my first category for my first item here, it doesn't literally display the cell reference A2. Now that it's an official table, it's actually displaying the name or the field name for that column. So if my category is equal to, and I'm going to do this in quotations, income, quotations, comma. So with the if function, we test for something to be true, and then we say, well, what happens if it's true? And then what happens if it's false? Well, if my category is income, then I want the difference to be the actual minus the budget. And I'm just clicking on the cells and I'm seeing that's what it's writing here for me. And then I type a comma, and now I do what's false. So if my category is income, it's the actual amount minus the budget amount. Well, since I only have two categories, income and expense, if it's not income, therefore it must be expense. And if it's not income, it's going to be budget minus actual. And then I do a closing parentheses to finish off the if function. That is a complete if function. Now, it can look pretty tricky, because it's long and it's got these three important arguments. So if my category is equal to income, then I want to do the actual minus the budget. Otherwise, I want to do budget minus actual. I press enter, and another benefit of it being a table is it auto-fills that down for us automatically. I don't have to click on this and then double-click the fill handle, although I could. Or click it and then just drag the fill handle down, which that works as well. Excuse me. So now we've got this going. I think we're in pretty good shape. Let's just double-check. So if I look at my grants, well, that's not a good one. I'll look at my primary job. I earned actually $40 more than I budgeted. That's positive 40 bucks. But for my freelancer gig work, I only earned $310. I budgeted $400. That's $90 down. Now let's go to groceries. I actually spent $436 and I only budgeted to spend $400. That's a deficit of $36. I had to use up 36 bucks there. And here's a positive one. For dining out. Oh, nope, I want to go to this one. Transportation. I actually spent $101 in this month, but I budgeted for $120, so I saved $19. That's a $19 benefit, therefore it's a positive number. And now that we have this, you can actually select all of this data, all these positives and negatives and things like that. And using the quick calc area down here in the lower right is very tiny, but I can see the sum of all of this is negative 92. That means for this particular month, I'm actually $92 south, or $92 negative of this particular month. That's not a good sign. That's pretty far off, actually. And of course, a big factor in that is I earned less than I was expecting for my gig work. So that hurt me there. Even though I did earn a little bit more from my primary job, this overall is still a negative $50. That's a $50 deficit just in income. So my income was $50 less this month than what I was expecting. And it looks like for my expenses, if I just select those, I was $42 short right there. So $50 less in income and $42 more in expenses than I budgeted. Those things combined together into that $90 deficit, or $92 deficit specifically. So we can get some useful information from this right here. And this could be concerning, right? So, well, if I'm $90 or $92 short this month, what does that really mean for me? Well, it probably means I had to use credit cards. Credit cards are a debt. You borrow the money to pay for it later, and this is how we all get into debt, right? We ended up spending more than our income could cover, so we had to borrow the difference. So now my credit card bill is going to be $92 or $100 more than what it was before. And what I need to hope for is that next month I can change this around and hopefully be $100 up, positive. But this is the start of our worksheet here. And we're doing pretty good because we've got this all organized in a nice, neat table. And so we can see how all this information looks. And it doesn't matter how long the table is, we're doing great. Now I'm going to jump back over to here, and I'm kind of looking through what are some of the next things I wanted you to do. Okay, let's organize this a little bit. So pretty soon into here, we want to keep track of our education costs. So we're going to create a separate worksheet where we can summarize or estimate the monthly costs of going to school, because you're all going to school and you're all having to pay money to do that to some degree. So let's see. The reason this is important for us is because one of our budgeted items, you may not have caught this before, is we do have a school amount in here. And I've got $550 as the budgeted amount and $550 as the actual amount. Well, we all know school is not necessarily a monthly expense. There are some monthly expenses for school, but school for the most part is going to be by the term or the semester, depending on where we're going to school, right? So sometimes the expenses for school could be zero. Other times they could be several thousands of dollars. But when we're budgeting, we want to keep track of this in monthly terms. It's better to organize that way because our income comes in on a monthly basis and our other expenses are, for the most part, monthly expenses. If we get everything into common terms, much more organized. Go ahead and create yourself a new worksheet down there at the bottom, and you can do that pretty easily just by you can actually double click, I think, usually, but just click the plus to create a new sheet. And I'm going to go ahead and calculate, what am I going to call this? Monthly school expense. Perfect. So now we have a new worksheet to put some data in. Now, again, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to take some data that I've got already that I typed up, and I'll paste this up here. Let's see, I'll do paste. I'm going to just paste as values. There we go. And I'll go ahead and amplify that. And I'll just go ahead and bold these. This part isn't really too critical that it's a table, but let me zoom in so it's a little bit easier for you to see. There we go. Now, I think we could all pretty much come up with these, but I will tell you, when I did this the other day, making this worksheet first, I used AI to help me out with this. I can't remember exactly what I asked, but I said, hey, give me some typical expenses for a college student, and I even asked it to throw in some estimates, some annual estimates for me. And you can decide for yourself which of these seem realistic. Let's kind of go through these, but I definitely want you to create this, so you might go ahead and pause and go ahead and plug this in. You can do much shorter descriptions than me. I think the expense item is probably going to be pretty clear. So if you don't feel like doing the description, leave that out. But at the very least, you want to get the expense item and you want to get the annual estimate. So what do we have here? Tuition and fees, $4,800. Now, what I did for something like this, for the annual estimate, I did make a formula here. You can't see it in this level, but for instance, we can easily put a formula right in here for this amount. And if we consider what is the per credit cost for COCC, okay, maybe it's $115. Of course, they're also throwing fees in here, so maybe I'll just go ahead and put in $120 per credit hour. Now, we're going for an annual cost, so you think about how many credits do you take per year? Well, maybe you're doing 12 credits per term. That's 12, 12, and 12. That would be 36. Do you take summer classes? Maybe you do, right? So maybe you do one summer class and that gets you to 40. So I can do 120 per credit hour times 40, the typical number of credits per year, and we get to $4,800. So that's where I got that number from. And if you were going to a bigger school, let's say a four-year university like Oregon or U of O or OSU, well, the per credit cost is going to be a lot higher, even though you still might only be taking 40 credits per year. So that would increase that tuition and fees. So that's where I got a number like that. Now, a lot of these others, I just kind of left at whatever AI suggested for them. So textbooks and course materials, sure. You can kind of estimate that. Just consider, take care of one of your terms. Well, if one term I spent $300, maybe in 3 terms, I'll spend $900, something like that. I put in $600. And I only did this because I know this class particularly has some book cost, but many other classes that I teach don't have a book cost. So kind of averages out a little bit lower. Technology cost. How much are you spending on a computer? That kind of thing. Now, is this going to be a repeating annual cost? Maybe, maybe not, but I just put in $300 for if you're going to buy a laptop. And I say, hey, you're not getting a laptop for $300. No, for something like this, you might think, you do a little backward calculation. So, okay, well, I'm going to buy a computer. Maybe my computer is going to be $1,100. And I plan to use that same computer for 4 years of schooling. So I would just take that $1,100, divide it by 4, and you'll get some other number, less than 300 actually. And you say, okay, I don't know, do you print stuff? Yeah, maybe not. I used to have printing costs as part of my college life, but maybe you don't have printing costs or other things that you might do technology-wise. Do you have to buy stuff? Do you have to buy a webcam? Do you need to buy a portable mouse? Do you need to buy a Bluetooth keyboard to go with your laptop? Who knows? So you just kind of guess at some of those costs and divide that. I'm going to use them for all 4 years of my schooling or 3 years of my schooling or 5 years, whatever you're going to do. And you kind of give yourself an annual estimate. Various supplies, parking passes or transit cards. Yeah, this may be zero, So this may not be a part of your college life. Maybe you don't have to buy a parking permit, or maybe you don't have to buy a bus card or anything like that. Maybe that's taken care of. The school doesn't charge for parking, for instance. At schools I went to, they always charge for parking, but at COCC they don't. So this could be zero. I just left it at the default 40. Any other student fees that you might do? Yeah, COCC has these fees. There's tech fees and there's Mazama gym fees and things like that. So you could plug that in per year. Now I've got printing and copying again, which is kind of weird. Even though printer ink, that's what up there was for technology costs. So if you have to buy printer ink for your printer. Tutoring, maybe that's an expense. Maybe it's not an expense for you. Yeah, you could plug a 0 in there. Any licensing or certification fees. Now, if you're a CIS student, this could really be a big part of it. If you're a business student or a healthcare student, this may or may not be different. I imagine healthcare students probably also have some certification expenses in their future, but maybe business students don't. So factor in a number that sounds good to you based on what you know. It's okay if you're a little bit off. Graduation fees and things like that. Obviously, this isn't going to be $100 per year necessarily. This could just be 1 year. And so if it is $100 that you might expect. And in fact, we'll do it this way. We'll say it's going to be $200. You have the cap and the gown and maybe other expenses. And maybe we plan on being in school for 4 years. We'll divide that by 4. So $50 a year for the annual estimate. Now, after we've got this information, we do want to figure out some things. So let's go ahead and put a row down here. The total annual, and then we're going to do the monthly estimate. So the total annual is going to be pretty easy. Now I'm just going to put my insertion point. I'm going to activate the cell where I want my total annual to go, and I'm just going to press Alt equals, and that's going to automatically give me a sum right there. Looks like it's got the right data selected. I'll press enter. So basically it looks like my schooling will be about $6,500 per year. And then I'll do the monthly estimate. I'll do equals. I'll take my total annual, divide that by 12 months, and there we go. And I get a number like 542.5, 542.50. And I'll just head over to my college budget worksheet. And I think I had 550 before. I'll change it to 545. Now, if we did our estimating right, and I'll change the actual to 545 as well, this should be pretty darn accurate. Now, again, we don't have these expenses happening every year. Oh, let me show you something else. Let's do it this way. I'm going to double click on this, and I'm going to use the round up function. In fact, let me zoom in some more. With these estimates, it's always good to round up, give yourself a little bit of cushion, right? So let's see. I'm going to change this to, in front of this division formula, I'm going to do the round up parentheses. So this division, C12 divided by 12, I'm going to round that number up, comma. Now, if I type a 0, it's going to round it up to the next whole dollar. Instead, I'm going to do -1. This should round it up to the next 10th place. So for instance, if I round up, I had 542.50. Now it's going to round it up to 550. So the -1 here in the round up function is one place to the left of the decimal, which means 550.00. I move that decimal 2 to the left. That's going to be my second 5 there. Now, just to make this a little clearer, if I had this as 0, it's going to round up to the whole dollar. Remember, I started with 542.5. It's going to round up to 543. So if I change this to -2, it's going to round up to 600. It's 2 places to the left of the decimal. 1, 2. So I'm going to do this as a -1 again. That's the round up function. I don't want to round because it could potentially round down, and I want to give myself a little bit of padding, a little bit of margin for error. So there we go. So now I'm back up to my monthly estimate is 550. I'll go back to here, 550. Change this to 550, just so it's a little more realistic. Now, this of course is a monthly expense. Well, what if I don't have this? What you do is you open up a separate savings account at your bank. And this is very easy to do. At every credit union or bank I've ever had, you can easily create a virtual second, or not even virtual, a second savings account very easily, and you can usually name them. My wife and I, we have one called Summer Fund, or if we're saving up for a car or something like that, we might do a car fund, and we can, on a monthly basis, put money into that account. So what do you do with something like this? Well, before school even starts, for several months, maybe half a year, you put in $550 per month into this separate school savings account. And then when September rolls around and you have to pay your tuition and stuff, you have that big expense, a couple $1,000s, you take it out of your school savings account. And then you keep rebuilding your school savings account on a monthly basis. And then a few times a year, 4 times a year maybe, you withdraw from that big savings account. Maybe you transfer an amount to checking and you write a check or something like that. Or you transfer an amount to checking and you use a debit card. And that way your school savings account is steadily building up each month and then drops down a big chunk. And then steadily builds up and drops down a big chunk. But you're always paying off your school expenses from this separate school-focused savings account. Business owners would do something very similar related to taxes. So a business owner is going to get income on a regular basis from their business. And so what they would do is maybe every time they get income from their business, they're going to take 25% of that and they're going to stick it into their taxes fund. And then, of course, when they have to pay taxes, they may pay taxes on a quarterly basis, by the way. They'll just withdraw money from their separate tax account. That way there's no big surprise. If you're a business owner, you don't want to get surprised. Oh crap, I now owe $11,000 in taxes and I've been spending all of my income coming in. What are you going to do? You're going to debt. So this is a way we can really start to prepare for big but irregular expenses like schooling and stuff like that. So now we have this information. Okay. Now, while we're here, I also want to do this separate sheet. I'm just going to do this off to the side here. And I've actually got an example on my existing budget. So I did this the other day, and this can come in handy too, just to kind of keep us alert to when that next activity is going to be due. And for something like this, I used conditional formatting. So that's what I want to show you. We're going to create this, and we'll create this by hand here. I think I've got the dates pretty much correct here. So off to the side, doesn't matter where, I'll start over here. I'm going to go ahead and write term starts, tuition due date, days till due. And we're doing it this way because it also gives us the opportunity to calculate with dates. So let's see, the term, what have we got? We've got summer, and then I got fall, winter, and spring. And you can keep going a little bit further if you're so inclined. Now, summer term starts June 23, 25, and then fall 9/22/25, 1/5/26, 3/30/26. Now, our tuition is typically due, I think, 2 weeks after the start of the term. So we can do an equals the term start plus, you could do plus 14 days. However, that sounds a little bit risky if we think about, oh, that's the last day tuition is due. I'm going to do plus 10 days. So I'm going to say the tuition is due 10 days after the start of the term. And there we go. And since we've got a formula here, we can just autofill that down. So now we have our tuition due date. Perfect. Okay, that's pretty good. And this is dynamic. So if I was wrong on one of these start dates, I could change the start date and the tuition due date will automatically update. Well, now I'm curious, well, how many days is this going to be? All right, well, this is okay. I can write equals, and then I can do the tuition due date, or click on the cell that contains the tuition due date. Now, because this is not an official table, it's not telling me the name of the field. It's just, it's just H2. So that's perfectly fine. I just want you to know the differences between using an official table versus just this data. H2 minus today. Now, the today function is going to use our current date, whatever that current date happens to be. The today function doesn't have any arguments, any parameters inside of the parentheses. So it's just the word today with an empty set of parentheses. And I press enter, and there we go. Now that doesn't look logical. I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to change this over to comma style so I get a number. And I see it's 23 days. Now, I'm making this video on June 10th, 2025. Summer tuition for us is going to be due, let's say, July 3rd, 2025. That's only 23 days away. And if I fill this down, I'll see, oh, great. So now I can really see when something happens to be due. Now, I want you to see what a negative might look like. So let's see, I'm going to select all of these term data cells, and I'm just going to autofill them down. I said autofill, I didn't mean to do that. Say that anyway. So I select a range of cells, put my cursor on the border, and I just drug down one chunk. And so now it's all moved down. And I could do something like this. Spring 20 5. Now, when did spring term start? I don't know. It probably started similar to this spring term. Actually, I'll just go to my calendar here, and I'll go up. And it probably started, I bet it was April, nope, it was probably Monday, March 31st of 25 is probably when spring term started. So I'll go ahead and put in March 31st, 25, just so we can see a past one. And this, of course, is going to be spring 26. Now, the tuition due, I'm just going to go to my fill handle, drag it upward. So I've got my tuition due, and I'll take my day still due, and I'll drag that upward, and now we can see that's a negative. In accounting, often a negative number is shown with parentheses instead of the little minus sign, because sometimes the minus sign is tough to see, so they consider this a little bit more obvious. So now we can see, ooh, great. Days till due is now a negative for that month. But the summer, that's the one that's upcoming. Okay. So now I want to highlight the particular row that's the most important to us. Which row is most important to us? It's going to be the one that is the most upcoming. Okay. So for me, since I'm doing this June 10th, that means it's the summer term. I don't want to highlight this past one, and I don't want to highlight these future ones. I want to highlight this specific one. To do this, we're going to use something called conditional formatting. We're going to format cells based on some condition being true. And the reason I want to show this to you now is because you've just done an if function, and this isn't necessarily an if function we're going to do here, but it's called an and function. And it's similar to an if function. So we're going to start off by selecting all of the data for our terms, our starts, our tuition dues, our days still due. Select all of that data. And if you went a little bit further than me, fantastic. Go a little bit further and you can select more of those. So I've got this one on my home ribbon. Make sure everything's still visible. There we go. I'm going to go to my conditional formatting, and I'm going to go to create a new rule, conditional formatting rule. There's a lot of various conditional formatting things you can explore, but I'm going to go to new rule, and I want to choose the option to create a formula. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. Now, this is very tiny, I'm afraid. So it's I can't really zoom in on this. It's always tough to do in person in a real life class too, but this is what I want to type in my formula for conditional formatting. And I guess I'll display it right here so you can kind of see the data behind it. So I'm going to type a formula. So I always start with an equal sign. Now what I want to really look at is the days till due. I don't want to highlight any that are negative, which means I don't want to highlight if they're less than 0. But I also want to highlight, specifically in my example, just summer. So I think I want to highlight if it's greater than 0, which means not in the past, and I want to highlight it if it's, let's say, less than 90. Because I'm only going to have one at a time that's 90, right? Because that's 3 months, 90 days. So that should work out. So in my formula here, I'm going to write and. The and function. Now the and function, of course, like all functions, has a set of parentheses. Now in between these parentheses, you know what, I'm going to get rid of the second one just because it's so tiny. Okay, let me do an opening parentheses. So there's my and opening parentheses. So the if function looks for one thing to be true. The and function can look for multiple things to be true. So and $I2 is greater than 0, comma, and $I2 is less than 90, closing parentheses. Now I know this is really small, but I want you to focus on this for a bit before. That's actually, I think it's well written, so we'll be able to change the format here in just a second. So my and function has 2 arguments in there. I've been saying arguments. Parameters and arguments are very, very similar. I'll say parameters. 2 parameters in there. I'm looking for I2. Notice I just focused on I2, just the first one. If the days till due is greater than 0, meaning it's positive, and it's less than 90, meaning it's relatively short, it's within 3 months. And both of those things need to be true because I've got the AND function. Now there's also an OR function, which means either one of the two things can be true. But in our experiment here, the AND function is the best one to go for this scenario. Now notice I did $I2. Now I did $I because all of these cell references are going to refer to the I column. So I wanted the I column to be absolute, hence $I. However, I only want to refer to I2, and then I want to refer to I3, and then I4, and I5, and I6. So I want the number, the row number, to be relative. I want it to change. So I don't put a $sign in front of the row number. So this is called a mixed cell reference. $I2 means an absolute column and relative row. Now I'm going to change the formatting, and I will just change the fill, and I'll change it to a orange color, and I'll click OK, and I'm going to click OK, and there we go. I can now see that the summer term is highlighted, even though this conditional formatting applies to all 5 rows of my data here. Summer term is highlighted because the days till due meets both of the criteria in my AND function. Days till due is greater than 0 and less than 90. It's the only one that meets that criteria, so that's the only one that gets highlighted. And because the summer term tuition due date is the one that's closest, it's fast approaching, that's the one I want to be highlighted. I want it to draw my eyes. Oh crap, my tuition due is going to be due in just 23 days for summer term. I got to make sure, of course, that I've been adding to my school expenses. Now granted, summer term may be less expensive, so I say, hey, great, for summer maybe I only need $550. Maybe I only need $1,100, something like that. Let me just make sure that your account is building up to that. But there we go. So that's using a little bit of conditional formatting in a more, I don't want to say complicated way, but certainly in a more useful, realistic way involving numbers, dates, things like that. Now remember, in Excel, dates are numbers, so it means kind of the same thing. But we're doing very, very well in this. Now the other thing that I think is useful for college student budgeting, remember we're still working on our budget's looking good here, is we want to keep track of debt payments because a lot of college students have debt. So I'm going to create a new worksheet down here, and you can't see that, but I'm just going to click the little plus down there on my sheet tab, and let's see, what am I going to call this one? How about loan? Oops, I'm typing it up there. I need to double click on the sheet tab, sheet 3. I'm going to call this loan payment. There we go, can zoom in. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple of calculators here which will calculate the monthly payoff for some debt because that should be part of our budget. So one of our expenses is a debt payment, meaning if we have credit card debt or school loan debt or something like that, that should be part of that debt payment for sure. And we might even make separate ones if we wanted to. We could actually have credit card debt as one expense, and then we could also have student loan debt as another if we have student loan debt. So easy enough to do. On the budget, I just right click on a row, insert, and I can do another one here. Expense saving. Now it seems weird. I'm using the saving category, and I'm really putting these expense categories in. They don't necessarily apply to us for this particular activity, but there is a budgeting concept called the 50-30-20 rule, which means 50% of our money goes to needs, 30% goes to wants, and 20% goes to saving and investing. I consider debt payment to be within that saving and investing category because, in fact, I even consider schooling to be in that saving and investing category because money you spend on yourself, an investment in yourself, makes sense to me. Now, I put debt payments into that savings category too because if you have no debt, then you're going to have more savings. And if you have a lot of debt, maybe all of your saving money goes to debt repayment. You're not saving any money off to the side, like in a Roth IRA, a retirement, or emergency fund, or something like that. So, do I even have an emergency fund on here? I don't. So we'll say we have our credit card debt payment, and then we have our student loan debt payment, something like that. And I don't know what to put in here. Well, just for now, we'll just put in, let's say we're putting in $100. And now this obviously is changing my total expenses, so I'm going to be way off of my income, but that's okay for now. And of course, I do have Roth IRA in here. That's for retirement. And do we have any savings for an emergency fund? I think students should always have an emergency fund. So let's go ahead and insert another row in here. This is going to be another expense. It's also going to be in the saving area, and I'm going to just say emergency fund. And you don't have to put a lot of money into an emergency fund. I think an emergency fund should maybe have 1 month's of expenses. So if you're out of job, or if your gig work doesn't work out well for 1 month, you don't have to go into debt. Instead, what you do is you draw from your emergency fund, something like that. I think in real life, once you're out of school, an emergency fund should be 3 to 6 months of your expenses. So if your expenses were to really total, in this case, $3,000, then a real life adult emergency fund might be $9,000, $10,000. So that way, if you're out of work for a month or two or something like that, you've got an emergency fund that can handle that. Now, when you're young and in school, I still think you should have an emergency fund. Some experts just say $1,000. So if you need a car repair or something crazy like that comes up all of a sudden, you don't have to go into debt to fix it. You just go to your emergency fund. So let's say we want to do this. We want our emergency fund to be at least $1,000, as much as $3,000, which is our monthly expenses. We'll split the difference. Say we want $2,000 divided by 12, and that gets us to $166. Ooh, maybe I want to save up to this for 2 months. What is it divided by 24? 2 years. Okay, $83. I'm going to say, I'll just type in now 90. So I'm using Excel to do some quick calculations to give me a realistic number. And basically, I'm now saying every month I'm going to put $90 into a separate savings account. I've got a separate savings account just for schooling. I've got a separate savings account just for emergency fund. And I don't want it to be a go-to thing. I may go months, I may go a year without using my emergency fund. But I want to know that it's there and slowly growing, so when and if and when I do need it. There's always going to be a when you need it, of course, with an emergency fund. Emergencies always happen, it seems. Hopefully they come out spread out over time, though. So now we have another expense there. Now, in this playing around, I see that I've grown my total monthly expenses to $32.85, and my income is only $3,100. So I'm going to play around with some numbers, and I'm going to say I'm expecting my primary job to be $2,400 a month, and maybe I really got $2,440, and my freelancer gig work, maybe we're doing well, $500 a month, and maybe I got $410, and now my actual income is $3,300. My actual expenses are $32.85. Now we're in the green, in the black is usually what they say. Negatives are often expressed in red, so I'm in the red, that means negative, and in the black is generally a positive. And there we go. Now, of course, this is not very realistic. Just, hey, if I need more money, I'll just put in my budget and I'm going to have more money. No, it just means that, okay, if this is truly what my expenses are, if my expenses truly are $3,200 a month, I need to make sure I have $3,200 or $3,300 a month in income coming in. Well, if I've got a primary job that does all that, fantastic. Stick with that primary job. If your primary job is not enough, maybe you have to have a secondary job. Maybe you have to have some side work, some gig work. Maybe you are able to get some grants or something like that for schooling, because that can obviously help with expenses. It is not unusual to have multiple sources of income, especially these days, and especially for the typical college student. Multiple sources of income is good because then you're not directly dependent on any one source of income 100%. Okay, so played around a little bit of that. Let's head back over to our loan payment. We're on another worksheet here, all within our same workbook file. I'm going to hit save because it feels like it's been a while. And let's go ahead and do a student loan debt repayment calculator over here. Let's see, I'm going to do this over a couple of cells. So I'm just going to stretch those columns. And we're going to have our debt amount. We're going to have our interest rate. We're going to have our months to pay off. And then we're going to have our monthly payment. There we go. Now we're going to do a couple of these. Let's do this one off to the side here. What is this one? This is going to be our credit card debt payoff calculator. There we go. And I'll go ahead and make these columns. The function that we're going to use here, the payment function, is exactly the same for both of these. So we'll kind of work on them together. What is our credit card debt? Card debt. There we go. And what is the interest rate? We'll have to figure that out in a little bit here. Months to pay off and the monthly payment. Perfect. There we go. Let's assume, what is your student loan debt? Now, even if you have no student loan debt, kudos to you. That's fantastic. Go ahead and plug in a number here like I am, just so we can go through this calculator process. Okay. So let's just say our debt amount is $11,000. What is the interest rate? I don't know. I'm going to put an 8.9%. How soon do you want to pay this off? Do you want to pay it off in 10 years? Well, that would be 120 months. Do you want to pay it off in 5 years? That would be 60 months. Do you want to pay it off in 8 years? Equals 8 times 12, 96 months. However you want to do that. And then we're going to have Excel calculate our monthly payment. Now let's jump over to our credit card debt. How much credit card debt have you got? If it's zero, again, kudos. That's fantastic to not have any credit card debt. But pretend that you do. What is our credit card debt? Maybe we have $4,000. Now, interest rates on credit cards can be pretty friggin' high, so I'm going to plug in 18.9%. Very likely they could be higher than that, though. How fast do you want to pay off this credit card debt? Do I want to pay it off over 2 years? That would be 24 months. Let's see what happens. So now we want to have Excel calculate the monthly payment for each of these debts. Technique is going to be identical. So equals the PMT function. Now, there are several parameters that we have to put in, 3 parameters specifically. There are 2 other parameters, but I'm going to hold off on those because those are optional. I know they're optional because the parameters are in brackets in my little screen tip here. But the first 3 are essential. The first one is the rate. I'm going to click on the cell that contains my interest rate, and I'm going to divide it by 12 to get into monthly terms. Now, I will tell you, I had a student loan back in the day. My student loan compounded on on a daily basis, which I hope is unusual. That was annoying when I discovered that. I didn't realize it at first, but I'm a spreadsheet nerd, if you couldn't tell. And so I'm keeping track of my student loan payments on a spreadsheet, and I'm paying extra to pay it off sooner. And I'm calculating it down, and I'm thinking, okay, I need to pay this amount in order to pay it off, and then I get my statement. I'm double checking my numbers, and I see that their number is like $2 off from what my number is, and I'm good with Excel. So I know, wait, we're using the same math. The math isn't different for the bank or for me. Like, what is up with this $2 difference? So I call up customer service. I'm like, hey, what's going on with this? And they explain to me, oh, our loans are compounding on a daily basis, which means I would have to do divided by 365 here and calculate a few other things differently. Compounding on a daily basis benefits the bank, hurts me. So I'm going to compound on a monthly basis. Most loans are monthly compounding. So I take the rate, divide it by 12. Then I do a comma, number of payment periods. This is the number of months left. Comma. Then I write a minus sign, a negative, and I click on the debt amount. Closing parentheses, press enter. There we go. So if I have an $11,000 debt that charges 8.9% and I want to pay it off over 96 months, my student loan payment, this payment, debt payment, whatever it is going to be $160.58. So I can go to my college budget and I have my student loan debt, and I thought it was going to be 100, but it looks like it's going to be 160. I'll just say 169, and I'll change this to 169. Okay, go back to those loan payments. Let's calculate the monthly payment for the credit card. Equals PMT, parentheses, the rate, the cell that contains the rate, and I'm going to divide that by 12, comma, of the number of payment periods, 24, comma, then I do a negative sign and I click on the credit card debt cell. Closing parentheses, there we go, $201.44. Now I expected that to be a little bit less, right? Credit card. Oh, I actually expect a little bit higher, so it's cool. I'll get to change this. So what do I think here? About $200. Sure. I'll head over to the budget and I'm going to change my credit card payment to $202. Maybe I pay $202 every month. Okay, so now, all right, looks like I'm going to pay a little bit more to my student loan debt and pay a little bit more to my credit card debt. And that gives us a more accurate picture. Now, what if you have several credit cards? Maybe you have a couple credit cards. You can do something called a weighted average. So let's go ahead and take a moment to do that too, because this is assuming our $4,000 of credit card debt is all at 18.9%. Well, maybe that's not exactly accurate. So that means our monthly payment's not going to be terribly accurate. So we're going to do what's called a weighted average. And let's see, how do I want to set this up? Let's say we have our debt. Maybe we have a credit card 1 and credit card 2. Actually, I'll use the fill handle. We can do that. Here's credit card 2. And we have the amount owed, and we have the weights. And then we also want to keep track. I'm just looking over at my cheat sheet here. We also want to keep track of the interest rate. So we have 2 credit cards, and we know our total credit card debt is $4,000. So be it. So let's say with credit card 1, we owe $3,000, and the interest rate is 17.9%. Oh, that's not what I want. I want 17.9% there. Now our other credit card is $1,000. And maybe that one's high. Maybe that's like 24.9%. Who knows? Something like that. Well, we can't just look at the average of these 2 interest rates. If I looked at the average of these, by the way, I'm just using my quick calc, I select it, and I see the average is 21.4. That's assuming they are equal. Well, most of my debt is at 17.9. That means it has a heavier weight. Now, as a student, you might use weighted average in helping to calculate your grades. For instance, what if quizzes are only 20% of the course grade and assignments are 40% of the course grade? Well, you would use a weighted average to see how much impact the average assignment grade has to your total class grade. And then, of course, midterms and finals and whatever, and all the projects and stuff you have to do. So we would do what's called a weighted average. Now, Excel actually makes this relatively easy. First, we can calculate our weights. Actually, let's go ahead and plug in a total. Alt equals. Here we go. Totals of 4,000. By the way, our credit card debt could have been equal to this total amount. So now we've got that in there. So then if something changes with one of our credit cards, we can see the total automatically updates. I'll put that back to 1,000. Okay, and so now we want to calculate the weighted average. I want to do that right over here to figure this out. Oh, what are the weights? The weights would be something like equals the amount, the proportional amount divided by the total amount. Now the total amount I'm going to make absolute, and I'm going to do completely absolute. Absolute column, absolute row, E11 is absolute. So there we go, 75%, and if I autofill that down, there we go, 25%, and I can make these look like percents very easily. There we go. So 3,000 out of 4,000 is 75%. 1,000 out of 4,000 is 25%. We could do that math in our head, so we can feel pretty confident that these are working, even if these were unusual amounts. So for instance, what if we had 3,100 and 900? Okay. The weights, the proportions have changed, even though the total is still the same. So now we want to figure out what is our weighted average interest rate. Again, our regular average is just going to be the average of these two numbers. The average of these two interest rates is 21.4. And that's good to know, but it's not as accurate as a weighted average. So we're going to put this right in here. I'm going to delete that. Now there is actually there's not a function technically for weighted average. However, there is a function that we can make it a little bit easier to manage, even though it could be kind of confusing. Let me scroll a bit to the right here. I don't want to go too far over. And move that up a little bit. Okay, so we're going to put this in here. Now there's a more non-function formula way to write this, and because this is so small, actually it would be easy to show you. So basically I can say, all right, take, I'm going to do parentheses, give me the this weight times this plus this weight, oops, I need parentheses again, this weight times that, and that's going to give me this number 19.48. That technically is the weighted average, 19.48. Now the way I did it is actually kind of fine here because we only had two various items. But what if there were lots of items? Maybe there were 5 or 6 or 7. This formula would start to look much longer and much more complicated. Well, the second method I'm going to show you is actually going to be a little longer than this, but it would be more efficient if we had more stuff. So there's our main formula. That's our weighted average. In fact, I'll do the other one right down here. We're going to write equals sum product. So the sum product will multiply items by items, just like I did here, but this time we can take our first array of the weights, comma, and then our second array, which is going to be the interest rates, closing parentheses, and I'm going to divide this by the sum of the weights. I get 19.475. Now, if I was only showing 2 decimal places, that would looks like it's rounding, but it's 19.48, and there we go. So that's our weighted average. So if you could see these two formulas side by side, there we go. Now you're thinking, gee, Ralph's little short formula method was pretty short. However, like I said, it was short because we only had 2 credit card debts. But what if we had 7 sources of debt? Maybe we have like 5 credit cards, we have some medical debt, maybe we're mixing our student loan debt in here, and this is just going to be our big debt payoff calculation at different weights and all that kind of stuff. Well, this would get longer and longer and longer depending on how many items we had. And then, of course, the sum product divided by the sum is going to be a lot more organized and a lot easier. So go ahead and calculate some weighted average. I don't care which method you use, but just be aware that there are a couple of methods that you can do to be accurate. So let's check that out. So what does this mean for us? Well, now we know our weighted average for our debt is 19.48. So I'm going to head up to this interest rate. I'm going to make that equal to our weighted average amount. And that's going to give us a more accurate calculation for our monthly payment. I know, what did it change by $1 or something like that? It changed by only $1 because we're dealing with a relatively small number. But again, if we mixed in our $11,000 student loan debt, we mixed in some other debts that we might have, then there you go. And it's easy enough to do, right? I can right-click, insert. Maybe we have family debt, and maybe we owe $2,000 to somebody. However, that particular debt is interest-free. So that's a 0% debt. Well, what's the weight? The weight is going to be 33%. Okay, great. Yeah, $2,000 out of my new total of $6,000. It's still an important debt to pay off, but now, because a third of our debt is 0% interest, the weighted average has dropped quite dramatically. And I can see, oh, great. And of course, this number is bigger because I've just added $2,000 of debt to the total, but still, if this was $1,100, we're back to our $4,000 total. And say, okay, half of my debt is 0% interest, family debt. About a quarter of it is at 17.9%. About a quarter of it is about 24.9%. We still get better, more accurate numbers. And I can see, okay, my debt payment plan is now about $186. I head over to my budget, and credit card debt is now $186, $186, something like that. Okay. So we've done really well at making our worksheet, and I think there's only one more thing that I want to do here, and then I'm going to set you off, and you'll be able to work on the other part of this participation activity for this module. We've done quite a bit. We're not going to do everything I was hoping, but we're getting certainly a lot of it done. Now, the other thing I want to keep track of, because I'm a big fan of saving, future saving and stuff like that. And that was a category on our budget here, right? It's this expense saving Roth IRA, expected to be $140 a month. I want us to be able to calculate the benefit of this particular line item. So let's go ahead and create another worksheet. I'm just going to click the plus at the bottom. You can now see that behind my camera. Double click on sheet 4, and I want you to call this Roth IRA. And let's go ahead and zoom in on that. Calculate some future savings here. Okay, let's see. Investing for retirement. Now, some of you might be kind of young. Maybe you're 18, maybe you're 19, 23, whatever the case may be, and you might be thinking, oh, it's way off. The benefit of starting young is so fantastic. I want you to start young. As soon as you have a job that's paying money, you can get a Roth IRA. And even if you only put $40 a month into it, that's fantastic to start. And then you can build up as your income goes higher. Let's calculate a couple things. What is our expected retirement age going to be? What is our current age? That's going to be our, then we're going to be able to calculate our years left. For instance, maybe my retirement age is 67, and our current age, maybe we're young, just 23 years old, equals retirement age minus current age. There we go, 44 years left. That's a huge time horizon. You'll be able to make a lot of money that way. Okay. Let's see, what else do we need to keep track of? Let's keep track of our monthly investing. How much are we going to invest each month? Do we have any existing savings? Existing IRA balance. Maybe we start this after the fact and we've already got a few grand in there. Maybe we plan on saving, let's say, $100 a month, but we've already got $4,320 already saved up. Fantastic. Okay, what else do I need to keep track of? Our rate of return. Rate of return, and I'm going to put in 11%. That sounds like a pretty decent number, but if you have 44 years left to retirement, this is perfectly realistic. 11% is not unusual if you have 30 plus years of time horizon, that's called. Now, if you were getting closer, if you're in your 40s and you've only got 20 years left, then I might ease off on that number, and instead of 11%, maybe I might try 9%, something like that. Okay, and then we have to calculate our future value. And you know what I'm going to do? I am going to insert some columns, actually just one column to the left. I want to make sure this shows up right there. That way it's a little bit easier to see on screen, and I can still keep it zoomed in nice and big. Okay, so we've got these numbers here. Some of these are just numbers like our ages and our years left. However, monthly investing, existing IRA balance, I'm going to hold down my control key and I'll click on future value. These are going to be monetary amounts, so I'm going to choose the accounting. I'm going to get rid of the decimals. So now it looks a little bit more money-like. Throws commas in there for us too. Let's calculate the future value. Equals FV. So similar to the payment function, the future value function asks for similar kinds of parameters. For instance, our rate of return. The cell that contains the rate of return divided by 12. We're doing this monthly, right? So we got to compound on a monthly basis. How's my time doing? Comma. I always like to get these videos timed like if we were in a real class. So we're doing pretty good, but it is a long video and we still have more stuff to do, obviously, with the SAM project. So that'll be a second video, hence our second class for the week. Okay, so there's our future value. We've got that in there. How many payment periods do we have? We're going to click on the cell that contains the number of years left. We're going to multiply that by 12. How many months are in 44 years? I don't know. I can't do the math in my head. So I'm going to let Excel do the math for me. Comma. Now what's my monthly payment going to be? It's going to be a minus sign, and I'm going to click on the cell that contains my monthly investment. Comma. Present value. Do I already have some savings? In this case, I do. So I'm going to do a minus sign. I'm going to click on the cell that contains my existing savings balance. And then I'm not going to use the last one type, so I'll just do a closing parentheses. I'm going to press enter, and we get to 1.8 million. Fantastic. So what is this telling us? If we've got $4,300 in the bank, and we save $100 per month for 44 years, and we get 11% per year return, we will have $1.873 million when we are 67. Then you can play around with these numbers. All right, well, maybe I want to retire at 65. Okay, takes me down to 1.5 million. Well, maybe I want to save $150 a month. 2 million. Nice. Should I play around with the rate of return? I wouldn't go too much bigger than 11%. You could see, well, what happens if I got 12%? Ooh, it goes to 2.9 million almost. However, now we're getting a little bit harder for me to say that's realistic. That's pretty aggressive, 12% per year. I like 11%, a little bit more. But you can kind of see how this goes. What if I don't have anything saved already? Well, you just change the existing balance to 0. And of course, that drops it down to 1.6 million. All right, maybe I have 5,000 saved. Now I'm at to 2.1 million. All right, well, what does it help having this particular money? So we can do something called the 4% rule. The 4% rule. The 4% rule assumes that you have some chunk of money at retirement and you're going to be able to spend a portion of this every month but still protect your balance, and they call it the 4% rule. Some experts will say you should use 3%. Some experts will say 5%. We'll just go 4%. That's the most common. And you could Google that, by the way, too, and you'll learn all about it. Not that it's that complicated. So let's do this. Equals, parentheses. We're going to take our future account, whether we're 65, when we're 65 or 67, whatever the case may be, and we're going to multiply that by 0.04, which is 4%. And that's going to give us an annual draw, an annual income from that $2.1 million. We're going to divide that by 12 to get a monthly draw. And we say, okay, great. If I have $2.1 million and I start drawing money from that, I'll be able to draw $7,000 per month. And the balance, the 2 million, should be pretty safe. It's not going to just go away, assuming we get at least 4% per year, which you should be able to get, post-working in retirement. 4% is pretty realistic. Granted, inflation can be high, but returns could be 6%, 7% sometimes. It all depends. So it's just a rule. I shouldn't say just a rule. It's a rule of thumb. It's just a guideline. However, we could have other income too. Maybe you've got Social Security income coming in. Maybe that's $2,000 a month. What's the total retirement income? Well, simply, I can select these two cells plus the empty cell, Alt equals. Great, 9,000. Sounds pretty good. Now, last but not least, zoom out just a bit because I want to be able to see everything on here. Let's go ahead and merge and center. There we go. We got our calculators looking pretty good. How much do we need to save every month if I want my total retirement income to be exactly 9,000? Can we do that? I bet we can. Now, our retirement income right now is $9,022. So I know $150 will get me there. But what if I want to get exactly 9,000? I know it's going to be less than 150. So what I can do is I can go to my data ribbon, then I can go to what if analysis, and I can go to goal seek. And I can fill out this little box here. I'm going to set cell. I'm going to click on the cell total retirement income. So I'm going to set cell C11 for me. And I'm going to set it to the value of 9,000, 9 and 3 zeros. No dollar signs, no commas. And I want to change my monthly investing amount. I'm going to click OK, and I'll click OK, and I say, oh, I need to save 149 bucks. Now, if I was showing some decimal places, I need to save $149.37 per month. All right, fair enough. Well, let's change this up. Now, for Social Security income, you're probably not going to get that at age 65. That's going to be probably more like 67. And we can see if we're doing this for a couple of extra years, actually we get to 2.6 million for our future value. That's pretty cool. How much do I need to save per month to get to $3 million? Ooh, let's try that. So I go back to data analysis, or data, what if analysis, goal seek. Now I'm going to set my future value to $3 million by changing the monthly investment. Click OK. I need to save $178 per month in order to get to $3 million based on these other parameters being true. All right. Well, what if I'm not 23? What if I'm 22 years old? Ooh, extra year till retirement. So I'm going to do what if analysis, goal seek one last time here. I'm going to set cell future value amount to value 3 million by changing my monthly investing amount. Click OK, and we're down to 155. Perfect. So there's a lot of ifs involved in this calculation, but if I am 22 and if I'm going to save and invest money until I'm 67, and if I save $155 per month, if I already have $5,000 saved up, if I get a rate of return of 11%, if all those things are true, I will have $3 million at age 67. 4% of that divided by 12 is going to be $10,000 per month. If I get $2,000 Social Security income, probably be more than that, then I could expect reasonably safely $12,000 per month of retirement income. That is how we can use Excel, future value calculations, goal seek, basic formulas using 4% rule and things like that, simple sum functions in order to come up with estimates. Now, if you are 45 years away from retirement, it's tough for you to figure out what your monthly expenses are going to be in retirement. I'm older. I'm closer to retirement, so it's easier for me and my wife to estimate what our monthly needs might be. Our monthly needs are certainly not $12,000, so I can start to back out some of these numbers for us and myself, you know. And obviously my numbers here will be a lot smaller because my current age is like 52. So my years left is not nearly as high, which means I should predict something like 9% instead of 11%. However, I've already got an existing IRA balance. And so although these numbers might be a little bit smaller, my monthly investing might be a little bit bigger. It could be a lot bigger. And my existing balance could be a lot bigger. So as long as you get to your goals, but Excel is fantastic for helping us track what we need to do to achieve those goals, whether it's some future amount, or whether it's paying off a debt, or whether it's calculating monthly expenses for annual or irregular expenses, or whether if it's tracking our budget. I'll change my Roth IRA to 155. 155 per month goes into that savings. Oops, I'll hit escape there. Okay, So that's going to conclude this. Now I'm going to bring the official one back over. Here's the sheet that I did the other day on the college budget. Now the only thing I did a little bit different on this particular worksheet, and you can do this if you like, but if you've got what I've got, this is perfectly reasonable for this part of the participation. I want to see a table formatted budget, which is showing the budget, the actual, the difference. You're going to have a worksheet which looks and calculates the monthly expenses for schooling, plus shows some conditional formatting over there. I want to see that. I want to see that you have used the PMT function to calculate monthly payments to pay off a loan. And I also want to see that you calculated the weighted average. And I also want to see that you used the future value function and maybe some goal seek and some 4% rule calculations to estimate future value amount for retirement. If you've got that, you're golden. That's a lot, I know, but we went through all that together. What we are not doing together, or not doing, you don't have to do this part, is I created some summary information up here. I did do a little chart. Charts are good. It's always good to have some chart experience. But I did this, and if you can kind of see what I did. I used a sum if. A sum if is a variation of an if function. And so I did a sum if, and I looked at my table categories, and I looked for the word income, and then I looked at the column D, the budget column. And so basically I'm saying add these up. If the category is income, then give me a sum of those budgeted amounts. And I did something similar for expenses. Sum if the category is expense, give me a sum of those budgeted amounts. So basically I'm getting the totals of just the income, and I'm getting a total of just the expenses. Now the conditional formatting is similar too. The conditional formatting into here, I did very similar to what we did for the days till a bill is due. I just said give me some green highlighting if the category was income, green shading, green fill. And of course I did something similar for actual, sum if the category is income, give me, So that's pretty easy to do actually, but I kind of liked having this front and center so it was a little bit easier to see at a glance what is my total income, what is my total expenses, and stuff like that. Now I am a fan of the 50-30-20 rule for budgeting, but I've often found for college students, it usually is hard to get it to work out right. But when you get out of college and you're normal, investing and personal budgeting and all that kind of stuff, it's a little bit easier to kind of track it. But I was curious what was going on. So again, I used sum if, and I looked for expense categories of need, and I got a total of those. And for wants and for savings, I did that. So I figured out, okay, what are those? And then I just figured out the ratio, just kind of like we did with the credit cards, I just took the proportion, and I divided it by the total. So basically 64% of my income is going to needs, 5% is going to wants, 31% is going to savings and investing and stuff like that. So not following the 50-30-20 rule, but I'm curious about how far off I was. And this is just a stacked stacked column chart. Bar charts are horizontal. This is a stacked column chart, but I did a lot of right click on it and format the plot area and formatting to kind of hide a bunch of the data, no legend. So now this is dynamic too, and this will look at the actual data of stuff. And I can actually see here my income is a little bit bigger than my expenses by about $5. So not too bad, but certainly something I would want to remedy, that I don't want to be in any kind of deficit long term. And if that means I have to save a little bit less, so be it. I will save a little bit less. In fact, it's dynamic, so I should just be able to go to my debt payment and say, you know what, I'm only going to pay $250 to that. That's going to lower my expenses a little bit. There it is. Now I can see expenses. Oh, was I reading these wrong? Was income at the bottom? I may have been reading that wrong. And now I can see my expenses are $3,082 and my income is $3,100. Okay. That, my friends, is that. Thank you for going on this ride with me. And We did a lot with Excel, and I'm willing to bet big money that we did a lot with Excel that you have not done before, especially with if functions. Maybe you tried SUMIF, conditional formatting, saving data as a table, calculating weighted averages, and things like that. But payment functions, future value functions, all that fun stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing your worksheets. Now remember, on your budgets, don't put real data in here for you that you send to me. You can just use the same numbers that I used. Use estimates and generic numbers. On your own, at home, I hope that you will continue to follow up on this exercise. And if not this term, later on, maybe over the Christmas break or over the summer break or something like that. And start to use this for your life. It's going to have more meaning for you, and it's going to give you more of a reason to explore some Excel features. Thanks for your work, and take care.